Good afternoon, everybody. The music fan is back, bringing music and history to the masses. And today we are digging through the last part of Linkin Park's discography. Now, I've already covered the first 6 albums, so I highly recommend that you look at these videos before you watch this one so you understand where we got to. But just a short recap. I've already delved through Hybrid Theory and Meteora, the new metal sounds of this band, the more pop-centric Minutes to Midnight, the electronic concept album A Thousand Suns, the amalgamation of everything that they've worked on before with Living Things, and the more rock-centric, metal-ish The Hunting Party. Now we are on to the last album, One More Light. Now this band recorded the album between September 2015 and February 2017 in multiple studios. It started in Larrabee Studios, where they usually do their work, but then after noticing that they needed a little bit more space, they also shifted to Sphere Studios, also in Hollywood. They also did a little bit of recording in London and Canada at points. This album was also produced again by Delson and Shinoda, which makes it the second album that's just those two as the primary producers. The pre-production of One More Light began in mid-2015 during the Hunting Party tour, and it was just Shinoda making concepts on his phone, and then the main production began as soon as the tour ended. In the process, they did work on some collaborations with some other people, though none of these songs ever made the cut. They worked with Zayed Hassan, which resulted in the song Sailing Through the Clouds, Martin Garrix, Hot Carl, Mike Beckzor of band Hero, The Lonely Island, which resulted in a song called Things in My Jeep, and One OK Rock. Again, none of these collaborations ever actually made the final version of this album. This is a change in ideas for this band in terms of the process of writing the music. Instead of writing all, in parts, they wanted to instead focus on the vocals and the lyrics. Then they would work on the hook and then the music itself. Shinoda talked to Billboard about how this process changed in saying, "We focused almost exclusively on songwriting, not on sound, not on genre, not on arrangement, on words and melodies." And that's something Rick Rubin has always told us to do years past, and we never listened because we started always track first. Now we're writing songs, and now we're just starting to get into the style of that. And he also talked about the different approach to songwriting as to write the song without any sound in mind, and instead write on the meaning in the mind. Instead of writing tracks piece by piece, the band wouldn't leave a session without having a song. It would start as a conversation, and out of those, the songs would build progressively from a chord progression to lyrics. And then he talked about with Zane Lowe about the actual style of the record, saying it's one of the most diverse stylistically. There's more genres mashed into this album than anything we've ever put out. You don't hear a lot of super heavy guitars. There isn't any screaming on the records, he adds. To some extent, it is a very polished record. Stylistically, we wanted to blend all of the sounds and genres together in a way that you can't tell them apart. Another thing about this album is that they have a lot more guest appearances, not just in the music, but also helping out with the songs. So on Heavy, you have singer Kiara on there singing with Bennington. And on Good Goodbye, you have Pusha T and Stormzy rapping on the album. But you also have songwriting collaborations from Julia Michaels, Justin Tranter, Ross Golan, Andrew Goldstein, Black Bear, and Egg White. Another cool thing that was supposed to be on this album, and I find this very fascinating because this ties into an album that I reviewed this year. Billie Holiday from A Perfect Circle was supposed to be on this album. So the two collaborated on the track titled Eat the Elephant, but it was ultimately scrapped because it didn't fit the style of this album. Strangely enough, April 2018, A Perfect Circle dropped Eat the Elephant, the actual album. So, it's an interesting thing that they working with a lot more songwriter collabs and a lot more collabs in general, taking the ideas from the Hunting Party with working with other people, but also adding it to the songwriting. And I also find it very interesting that their last album they went somewhere different where they had an idea in mind rather than the music and then writing lyrics to it. I very much commend them for doing this. So the album had 3 singles. Heavy on February 16th, 2017, Talking to Myself in July 25th, 2017, and One More Light on October 3rd, 2017. The album dropped on May 19th, 2017, and this is the only album that actually has a title track, One More Light. But we will get into all of that in just a second because I have to tell you how I feel about this album. Now, I have reviewed this before. You probably have seen it if you've been watching this channel. So, a lot has changed. Not necessarily where I place this album, but I see this a little bit differently now, and I feel like this is good to go back to because I watched the video again and I felt like I didn't give enough good information as to why I feel a certain way about this album. So now reading through the lyrics, now understanding what has happened with Linkin Park, I can say that I think this is some of the best lyrical work that they have done in general. If you compare to their first albums when they are, still in college and still trying to, still have that teenage angst, compared to now them being parents and married and having kids and dealing with the problems of midlife crisis, it's much more eloquently put. I think some of the best lyrics come on, or lyrical ideas come on tracks like Nobody Can Save Me, where it's talking about feeling overwhelmed by thoughts and feeling like even though people want to help out, no one can save you. And then the reverse of that in Talking to Myself. So the lyrics are from the perspective of Chester Bennington's wife, Talinda, trying to help Chester through this, but knowing that she can't really do much, and it feels like she's just talking to herself because she can't get through to him. There's even Battle Symphony. It has some cheesy lyrics, but it's again talking about having the armor to get through life and all the voices in person's head. Heavy be another one talking about self-inflicted pain due to depression. And there's some really catchy lyrics. The one that's really standing out to me is, I know I'm not the center of the universe, but you keep spinning around me just the same. And I think it's the idea of someone who knows that they aren't as important as they believe they should be, or their problems aren't as important as they believe they should be, yet they can't get away from them. And then holding on, why does everything feel so heavy? It works very well with the arrangement being a little bit lighter, yet the words themselves being heavy. Halfway Right has some great lyrics on there as well. It's about Chester Bennington talking about his past, where he was molested when he was young, but also with his addictions when he was young as well. And it's a good story. Sharp Edges, again, not necessarily the best lyrics, but it has some good meanings talking about going through life, making mistakes, and learning from them. And they're kind of cliched in talking about not running with scissors, and all these things. But the lyrics themselves are interesting. And then you have, at least on Bennington's side, the best lyrics, One More Light, talking about someone that the band knew who died of cancer and the ramifications of how that feels. And not only that, but some really, really poignant lyrics. Who cares if one more light goes out in a sky of a million stars? That is a very poignant of, like, who cares if you die? There's millions of others out there. What makes you so special? But then going to the end of that chorus being, well, I do. is the idea of, yeah, you might not have affected so many people, but you will affect one or more people in your life that you may or may not have ever known. Or the idea of going to a sitting at a table and you have one more chair that you don't need because this person's gone. It's a very poignant message, and they've talked about a lot of this stuff before, but I think they have finally gotten to a point where they can eloquate it the best that they can through experience, through all these ideas. Like, yes, there's nothing to say against their teenage angst and their feelings and their thoughts of their past and their childhood, but actually going through a lot more over the 20 years that they've been a band, it shows that it shows what's happened to them, and they're able to explain it better. There's also some songs with Shinoda on the leads, and honestly, those ones are interesting too. His more delve into his relationship with his kids, and on Invisible and Sorry for Now. And for Invincible, it's about basically a snapshot of what he would say to his kids when they were teenagers, and he's still protecting them, but they feel like they want more autonomy and more control of their lives, and start hating their family because of how much their parents are trying to care for them. I think that's an interesting song, especially one that they've never really touched upon in their discography as a band. And then also Sorry for Now is talking about the struggle of being a parent, but also being a musician who's always on the road. And that's also an interesting idea, that one that they haven't talked about. It's also, I guess, kind of like a mirror image of where'd you go from Fort Minor, where Fort Minor, they're talking about the idea of someone leaving someone's life and being away from it, but knowing that they'll come back sometime, but still missing them. I think there's a lot of very interesting lyrical ideas. The only one that doesn't feel great or as poignant is Good Goodbye. It's not bad, but it's kind of more tongue-in-cheek, telling someone to hit the road after a relationship, which they've done before. There's some good flow on there, but it's nothing special. So lyrically, a lot of really good stuff. The only problem for me is that the music itself doesn't always match that tone, or isn't always interesting enough to make up for the lyrics. There's some good arrangements. I think Nobody Can Save Me is better now that I've listened to it more. It takes some of the ideas of The Thousand Suns and Living Things, but it's a little bit more poppy and EDM-ish, and then eventually grows kind of like something that would sound on Minutes to Midnight in terms of the guitar work, and it's a nice arrangement that builds pretty well. Talking to Myself is the most rock-centric song on the album. Definitely feels like something that could have come from Minutes to Midnight. It kind of also feels a little bit Coldplay-ish at times, but it has some good parts to it. I like the chorus, and I like how it changes up at the last second at the last chorus. I like some of that stuff on there. Heavy, not my favorite arrangement, but I think the work between Bennington and Kiara works very well, though I would say Kiara is more the focal point on the song, and if it was just Bennington, I don't think it would have worked. I think there's something weird with his voice on that. It doesn't seem strong, and maybe that's the idea of this song, but his low vocals don't sound great on this, and we'll get a little bit more of that in a worse song later. One More Light, honestly the epitome of this album. It has a beautiful arrangement, and it lets these lines have the emotional impact that they need. The melody is beautiful. The only thing I really don't like is the repeated ideas at the end of some of the choruses, like flicker, flicker. It makes it a little bit too poppy, but I think it's a beautifully simplistic idea. And even Sharp Edges, again, not the best of lyrics, and it's very poppy, pop rockish, but I like the arrangement for what it is, and I like the melody on the chorus, even though it does tend to like basically border that popish idea. But everything else is kind of meh in terms of the arrangements. Battle Symphony, the best of these meh ones. I like some of the electronic ideas on here, but I don't like the chorus, and the melody itself on the verses is just catchy enough to not be irritating. Goodbye. I like the flow of Shinoda's rap on here. He kind of uses that triplet idea that you hear a lot in mainstream rap now, but I think the music behind it is interesting enough to make up for that idea. I don't like Pusha T's at all on here, and Stormzy's is serviceable, so that's why it's one of the later ones. Though again, this one feels kind of like I can't tell if it's a Linkin Park song or if it's a Fort Minor song with all these guest stars, because it kind of feels like Chester Bennington is that like feature chorus on this song that you'd hear on a lot of other rap albums. And then you get to the two Shinoda songs. Again, I like the lyrics, but I don't think Shinoda is a strong enough singer to make up for bland arrangements. He doesn't have a high enough register to make powerful statements, but he also doesn't have the emotional range that Bennington does. So it comes off as some of the weaker songs only because of the arrangement. I think Sorry for Now is better. I think the music is a little bit more interesting, though again, it has this middle part that kind of doesn't sound like Linkin Park. And then Invisible, kind of a throwaway. Halfway Right, again, interesting idea in terms of lyrics, but this is another one that Bennington sings with a lot of his low register, and it doesn't work for me. So we get to an album that has some very poignant lyrics about depression, about self-control, about the latter halves of your life, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff on here, but the music kind of destroys the ideas behind it. At best, you have some interesting songs like One More Light and Sharp Edges and Talking to Myself, and even Nobody Can Save Me. You got some interesting stuff there. But when it's meh, it's really bad. It's basically not listenable, at least to me, on some of these songs. And I will say it's better than when I first heard it. It's definitely still not in my top 50 from last year, and it's definitely not in the best half of the Linkin Park discography. But I commend them for trying this, like I've commended them for every other album that they've tried. For me, the problem is that they're trying to be a band that they're not. And there are other bands that do these ideas better. Are there some interesting electronic ideas on here? Yes. But last album felt like they were actually a band. And this one, it feels a little bit like more of Bennington and then Han. And then that's basically it. There is some Delson, but there isn't as much Shinoda on here. There's only one track that he raps on and two that he sings on. And there's some of the weaker ones on the album. And that's unfortunate. I think with a little bit more interesting ideas, this could have been a really good album. It could have been a good send-off for this band. And to me, it's just a lot of wasted potential. So I would say listen to it once, though you may want to steer clear of some of the songs, especially Invisible, Sorry for Now, and Halfway Right. But if you are interested in good lyrics, this is a very introspective album, and I appreciate that. I wouldn't listen to the album again. I probably would just listen to One More Light and Talking to Myself and probably Sharp Edges. Those are the three that I would definitely listen to again. But in terms of rankings, I think you can see where this is going. To me, this is my least favorite album of the bunch, only because what they tried didn't hit the mark. I think with everything else, you still had some really high moments, and the low moments weren't horrible. This one is some good high moments, but a lot of mediocre and subpar material. So, going through everything as a grand recap, number 7, this one, More Light. It has some good highs, but very low lows. Minutes to Midnight, the next most poppiest sound from this band, and it definitely shows. There are some really good highlights, but there's a lot of stuff that kind of sounds like something that came from Meteora or from Hybrid Theory, and it doesn't do as well in terms of the full band. There's some highlights, but it's very much more pop centric, and the lows on this one I think are a little bit lower than some of the other ones. Number 5, Hunting Party. Nice return back to their rock sound. I appreciate a lot of what they do on this album, but I think another one of these where the lows kind of hit a little bit too low, kind of like Final Masquerade, Line in the Sand, a lot of these songs, but there's a lot of really good arrangements, and this is where the band actually sounds like a band, and again, like compared to Meteor and Hybrid Theory. And I love a lot of the arrangements, a lot of interesting guitar solos, a lot of interesting guitar lines. I would definitely go back to this one again. Number 4, Living Things. A lot of really good songs on this album. I think like the first half of the album's really good, and a lot of catchy stuff. It definitely sounds like they've put all these ideas together in a great way and combined a lot of the stuff from the first 4 albums into some interesting ideas. But I think a little bit of the latter half of the album is a little bit too simplistic, and they try some of these ideas that just don't work, making it, you know, very mediocre at best at the end. But like Burn It Down, Lost in the Echo, a lot of really good songs at the beginning. Then you have number 3, 1,000 Suns. Again, one that I really, really like because of the ideas that they put on there. And there's some really catchy songs, Burning in the Skies, Waiting for the End, Even When They Come for Me. Just a lot of really interesting ideas, and the concept itself is really cool. I just think that the end doesn't do as well, and there are some ones that just miss the mark in terms of making a fully interesting concept album. But one of the better ones, if you haven't listened to it, definitely check it out. I say Hybrid Theory is number 2, only because I think some of the arrangements don't change over time. Like, this is amazing for our first album. It definitely shows that they had something there, because selling 30 million copies across the world is nothing to sniff at. But I think, as catchy as a lot of stuff are, there isn't enough difference in sound to make up for what I think number 1 is. And again, I think some of the lower ones are a little bit lower than my number 1, and even the lyrics aren't amazing. I think the way that they sold this as a rock metal-ish album and not a rap rock album at first definitely threw it off. One Step Closer as that's their first song ever, I think it was a waste. And yeah, I think that it wasn't as evenly balanced in terms of Shinoda and Bennington. But number 1 is a masterpiece to me. Meteor, amazing, has a lot of really interesting arrangements. Definitely a diverse sound. You get songs like Faint, a very fast rap rock song. You have Easier to Run, a beautifully electronic ballad. You have Breaking the Habit, this sound that no one expected ever from this band, and a very interesting song. You get something like Nobody's Listening with these Japanese flutes, and just a completely different sound. You get some very interesting intro parts and good transition ideas, and you have a better flow between Shinoda and Bennington. They are finally on their craft and understand that they've had more time to work with each other. I think that one shows that it's the best album by this band, and it shows that this is a very interesting band, and a band that tried a lot of ideas, and sometimes it didn't stick. And it's unfortunate that this fan base was so divided after 1,000 Suns. It's so there's a lot of people who still kept on and listened, but there was a lot of ones that were just like, why can't you give us Meteor? Why can't you give us Hybrid Theory? And it's sad. And after this album, it definitely showed, because this one got panned. One More Light got panned a lot, even though it debuted number 1 in several countries, and it became the 5th number 1 album on the Billboard 200 for them. It was certified gold in 3 countries and silver in BPI by the BPI in UK. But this got a lot of angry responses from critics. I see all over YouTube that there's a lot of very angry critics about this band after this album, and they gave an angry response. Like Bennington gave an angry response afterwards, being like, "You can't always have Hybrid Theory. You're not always going to have Meteor. You got to let us do what we want to do. We've been around for long enough. We can do what we want to do. And if you don't want to be a part of it, I'm sorry. You just don't understand." And I was kind of in that same, camp. I was like, why does it feel like these people are selling out? But now I understand that this is a more personal album than I ever realized. And after Bennington passed away last year, July 20th, it definitely brings a little bit more to this idea of, hey, we should have listened. Now, this is where that like vicious cycle comes in with the music industry of like wanting more from a band and wanting the same idea from a band and not wanting a band to progress. And there's a fine line between that. Sure, ask for stuff that sounds a lot like the stuff that you like, of course, but also let a band progress. Let them try something different. This band has been around for 20 years. It had 7 albums. You can't expect all of them to be Meteor or Hybrid Theory. But if you take a step back and listen through everything, you'll find a lot of really good stuff, like I did. So that's my time. I hope you enjoyed this look through the Linkin Park discography. I hope you gained a better idea and hug. I hope you have more of an appreciation for this band and want to actually check out some of these ones that you haven't. But tell me what you think about this album. Like this video, of course, if you do, share this with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and just keep on watching my videos. So in terms of the rest of this week, I know I'm a little bit behind, but tomorrow I have another Are You In? Then Wednesday I will have another one. And then Friday, in terms of this digging through discography, I'm doing a special bonus one right before I start another big series. So we've talked about all of Linkin Park, but there's one album that I didn't talk about in between that kind of like defined that band as well. So on this coming Friday, I'm going to be talking about Fort Minor's Rising Tide, the only album from Fort Minor and Mike Shinoda. And then I'm going to tie that into Sunday's Are You In? After the catastrophic event of suicide by Chester Bennington, there was an album by Shinoda that I've listened to recently, and I want to give my thoughts on it. So Sunday, I will be looking at Shinoda's Post Traumatic. But until then, I'll see you in the next video tomorrow. Peace.